open, but think of it as Vegas communication, all right? What we say stays here, all right? It doesn't need to be, spreading rumors or any sort of silly talk, all right? Just be willing to say whatever because you're in a safe place. That's the goal. So tonight we're going to have a few videos. We're going to go through some gender roles, some media stereotypes, and then transgender, trying to investigate kind of what that means, what people think, and how they act accordingly. Later on, we'll have Aiden Candy as a guest speaker. He's going to be clearing up some misconceptions, doing a question and answer form at the end there. You'll see the cards that you have, the index cards that we handed out. Those are for you to write down a question of something you maybe don't want to say out loud, even in this safe place. That, don't worry. You write it down. We'll collect them and then see if we can't clear up some of that, and he'll answer some of these questions. Again, if you participate, which is great, which is what we encourage, you'll get raffle tickets, which we'll be doing at the end here. We've got some good stuff from local sponsors and some stuff we put together. So with that, just a thanks to some of our sponsors who did give us stuff: Kinder's, The Bear, Cal Java, and a big thanks, M&T Florists, and a big thanks to Professor Amy Lance and Wondrous Women.
Who put on this wonderful event?
Oh, good of you to ask. Good of you to ask. This is a production of Communications Studies 234, Gender Communication.
Woo!
Woo! Yeah! Woo!
So with that, we're going to start out with the video. What would you do? Trying to figure out what gender roles are and how we use them.
So I heard that we're going to be going to a little party at Sarah's place. Is this true?
Don't say.
Yeah, me and all my friends are going. You were invited, but
I'm busy. I have to go to that concert thing with my host, but I don't know if I feel comfortable just to go in there alone, unsupervised with those women there.
well, it's a party.
I don't trust them.
There's going to be a bunch of people. And I know you have something against Sarah, but there's going to be a bunch of people.
Well, I see the way she looks at you, okay? And I don't feel comfortable as your girlfriend having girls look at you like that and having you walking around like, oh, it's totally fine, because you love the attention, don't you? That's what it is.
There's nothing I can really do. If someone looks at me, then I can't say, hey, don't look at me.
Well, it's not just looking at you. It's having those cute little flirty conversations. It's like having her number and texting her.
Why do you think I text her?
Hello, I was looking at your phone and I saw a text from Sarah. Hey, just like simple ones. Hey, how are you doing?
She's probably asking if I was going to come to the party. It's not a big deal.
It's just not fair to me because I always have to be running around worried, what are you doing? Who are you with? What's going to happen? I don't know.
I don't think I have to tell you what I'm doing at all times.
Well, I'm not saying at all
or tell you
times,
who I'm
but
with at all times.
certain situations, I think it's
Well, you know there's
for.
nothing going on between me and Sarah or anyone else, so I don't...
Because whenever I go out alone, I never go out with any guys. In fact, I don't even talk to really any of my old guy friends. And this is because of you. And, it's kind of your fault that my social life's been kind of stale. And you're just going off having fun at Sarah's place.
I don't know why you were talking to me like this. I don't...
It's because you just don't get it. You're not thinking. Sometimes I feel like you don't even care about how it makes me feel when you do things like that.
I don't know why... I don't know why you're saying these things to me.
Noticed that you noticed us arguing back there. I was just curious, how did you feel about the situation with me kind of getting very rude with Kyle, and how do you think he should have reacted to it as a man?
I think he should have stepped up and said something to you as a man. I mean, that's the man's job.
Okay. And what do you think if the roles were flipped and he was shouting at me or getting rude with me? Do you feel like someone should have stepped in Or,
Well, yeah, the situation would have been different.
yeah, because I was female.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much, sir. Have a good day.
So I heard you're hanging out with Mike tonight.
Yeah, and other people too, but you know, maybe there. Why?
I'm not sure how I feel about you hanging out with other guys. I just wish you had told me. I feel like you're not communicating with me more. Like, you're hanging out with Mike. I know you guys. I just wish you would tell me.
I mean, well, no, I tell you where I am all the time, but, like, Mike is just a friend. We've been friends for how, like, I've been friends with him longer than I've known you.
Oh yeah, that's what's bothering me. Because I know you guys have that history. And I'm not, like, saying, but,
It's
like,
not like we dated, though.
well, this is, like, the bottom line that for some reason you're not understanding, and to be honest, it doesn't surprise me that you're not understanding this, but you are my girlfriend, and you are supposed to do what I tell you to do. And at least, if you're not going to do that, if you're just going to, like, misbehave all the time like that, at least listen to me and have, like, any sort of,
Well, I feel like you're just taking it way overboard. I'm with you for a reason. I'm not with Mike. I've never even dated Mike.
I
I
feel
don't know why.
you're not with me on this, and obviously you don't respect me enough to think about what my opinion is on anything, because you're gonna still be hanging out with him. You're my girlfriend. You're my girlfriend.
I know that, but you're also my boyfriend, so I feel like we should be able to work this out, don't you think? And I'm trying to communicate.
This can be worked out perfectly. I have a perfect solution. I tell you to do something, and you listen to me, and you do it. I hate when you put me in these embarrassing positions where I have to be yelling at you. And, like,
You know what? No, this is a little embarrassing for me, I think. Honestly, it's a little
how do you
silly.
think I feel that I have to be, yelling at you because you just don't listen? You do stupid things like this all the time.
But you don't have to yell at me.
Obviously I do, because the point's not getting across. I understand. You don't understand what is going on here. That's fine. I'll live with that. But it's just a lot easier. It makes things a lot simpler if you just listen to what I say. Listen to me. You respect me enough to.
I don't know why you have to keep taking it back to respect. I do respect you.
Obviously you don't. You hang out. You do what I tell you to do. You hang out with people I tell you to hang out with, and don't be hanging out with Mike and come on.
You know, but when we first started dating, you didn't even mention who I hung out with, and now it's all about, like, what am I doing, who am I with, and it's not fair to me. I don't do that to you. I don't say, oh, who are you hanging out with today? Is Cynthia with you today?
As my girlfriend, you should recognize that it bothers me and then not do it. I shouldn't have to. We're going to make this very simple, and it's going to be end discussion, and we're going to move on. I'm the boyfriend, you're my girlfriend. You do what I tell you to do, do what I tell you to say, that's it. End of discussion.
Hi. So what made you look back at our conversation there?
I heard really douchey
Do you think you would have intervened at all, or if you aren't heading somewhere quickly?
How would you intervene?
Why do you think that is? Yeah. Okay. And what do you think if it was the flip side? If I was talking smack to a guy, do you think you would also do a bit of a head turn, or do you think you would really notice it as much? Oh, I see. Okay. Well, thank you very much for this very quick interview.
It should be from the
Have a good
guy.
day. Bye.
Then should we jump in?
No, the audio didn't work on this, but we were just trying to be loud to get someone's attention. So cool. Sorry. Yay!
Hi everyone, I'm Kyle. I'm the amazing actor from that video. I'm very happy to be here and thanks all for coming.
Thank you for catching that.
I've always heard a camera adds 10 pounds and it makes you look a little older. And obviously I still look like I'm 12 in that but we'll talk about gender image and the influences on that later. For now, let's talk about stereotypical gender roles that society has placed us in. First thing I'd like to bring up is when Kim, who's filming in the back, was yelling at me. The guy we interviewed laughed when he saw us, and he even said that as a man, it's my job to make sure that she doesn't talk to me that way. So let's open up a discussion. What does this attitude say about the roles we have placed men and women in today? Maybe now would be a good time to remind you that if you participate in free prize for that. Okay. Anyone else have anything to add? He said that it means men own the world. Okay. All right.
In the old days, the man of the house was mostly the person who brings home the food and everything, so they kind of have to say in everything. So I think that's kind of
Yeah. And then, okay, one more.
Women are more submissive, so they conform to what their man usually says.
Yeah, you all touched on like the final answer that I had, which was we have adopted and followed this patriarchal system where the man is dominant and the woman is submissive. That's why we never got a serious reaction to this scene. Nobody took it seriously. People were laughing the entire time. But when I was yelling at Kim, we got a lot more people to stop and look, and as you can see, we actually got someone at the end to intervene. Because people perceive this situation as more serious. So, like, another little discussion, was it though? I mean, really, what was the difference between these two scenarios?
There's almost like a danger kind of element, because we're all so hyper aware of domestic abuse within relationships that sometimes when you have men yelling at women, because they feel that they're entitled to be dominant, that they might take it too far sometimes. Or that if they're doing that in public, something else is going on in private.
Also, like, they're not just saying like they're not serious, like they yell at us, it's usually weird, something that doesn't matter, but if a man is saying something, okay, has to matter, he's the one making the choice. I almost feel like it's lack of awareness, because I feel like there are so many different levels of abuse. I mean, there's physical abuse, which is, I feel like, what people most identify with, and because men are stereotyped as the strong, dominant, powerful people, people kind of ignore or don't know about, like emotional abuse, or even, like substance abuse. Like, my mom is an alcoholic, and I know that, she gets really verbally violent, like with my father. And so I almost feel like with like abusive relationships, the one that we identify with is the physical part of it. And like I just feel like if everyone were just a bit more informed or aware, we could catch on to the signs of an abusive relationship.
Okay. And then one last one, and we'll move on.
I feel like since women are stereotypically known to be like more submissive and like weaker, that people feel like they need to protect women more. I feel like that's why they intervene.
It sounds like you all took this class. Finally, it's time to talk about the girl who intervened, which was really one of the most amazing things I've ever seen and part of in my life. The girl just came up to Kim and said, "Would you like to walk with me for a little bit?" and then took her out of the hostile situation. Of all the times that we filmed this scene, which was a lot, she was the only one to actually do anything. And so to close this round, why do you think that is, and what would you have honestly done in this situation?
I think that people, when people see situations like that, they think it's a personal matter. They think it's between two people in a relationship. They don't want to get involved. They don't think it's their business, and I think that's something that's really difficult for people to understand. It's different if
the reason that, less people intervened is because there was kind of a diffusion of responsibility. When there's that many people around, everybody expects somebody else to do something.
Yeah, it's actually called the bystander effect. People aren't going to do anything until they see somebody else do something. And to bring up on your point about the physical abuse, it should be noted that she actually did not step in until I physically grabbed Kim's arm. She stopped and looked, but she didn't actually do anything until I grabbed her. Unfortunately, she declined an interview, but obviously she didn't need to tell us anything because unknowingly she actually proved the point of this entire forum when her actions literally spoke louder than words. So thank you for your participation, and let's move on to gender image and how media influences that.
Right here, what comes to your mind?
I think of like skinny girls, blonde or brunette, usually long hair. I don't know, it makes me want to tan. That's what it makes me want to do. You ever feel pressured to look like the girls on the posters? Yeah, I think absolutely. Maybe not to the extent of like Victoria's Secret model, but definitely to like be skinny or fit or all that. What message do you think society is sending you from those lectures? That if you're skinny, you'll be happy, and that it's kind of, instead of being like healthy and eating right, it's kind of like however you can get skinny, like it's okay. I agree. Do you think the images such as these affect females more than males? I think it affects both because they set a standard for males, which they're like, oh, like she's not pretty enough for me, or like it kind of. I think it affects both. It affects everyone.
The images at the mall, I got first seeing pictures of the women and how they look, what they're wearing. What does your mind when you see these images?
Well, like the automatic impression is like, wow, they're really pretty, and I want to be just like them. And I think that's like, that's what they're trying to do. Is like, you want to be them, so here, buy all this stuff, so you can just like them.
Okay, so you already kind of said how you feel pressure to look and be like these people in these posters. Do you think this also extends to like the youth and the future?
Yeah, definitely. Like younger girls, especially, like all they see is size 0 models. Like the younger girls, you know, they're gonna want to be exactly like that when they grow up, and they're not really be healthy necessarily.
What messages do you think society is sending from these images?
I feel like it's kind of just like you don't get to be what you want because it's not up there. You know, if you don't see what you like up on the big screen, then like it doesn't matter. You know, you have to dress and conform to how everybody else is so that you fit in.
Why do you think society places such an emphasis on these images and that specific one that you see on billboards and on posters?
Again, I think it's just like that perfectness. Like everybody wants to be perfect, so they take one girl and they digitize her and do all this stuff and kind of give her that perfect image that everybody can strive for.
Do you think images such as this one affect females more than males?
I think it's more known to affect females just because, you know, females technically have lower self-esteem than males do, but I think it secretly, like,
So you think females are more, but okay. And going back to the last question, you referred to these images as the perfect, like people, perfect look. Do you think that that really is a perfect look, or that's just what society has said? Okay, this is what you have to.
Definitely, I think it's just society. I mean, perfect is a definition that's just like everybody's their own definition of perfect. So I mean, obviously, like a 4'8" girl isn't going to be the same perfect as like a 6' girl. Different skin colors, just the way you are. Everything's different. You don't necessarily all have to.
Do you think these images target a specific age group?
I would say it's probably more like our generation, like our age and younger. Not necessarily like older women because they're already like set in their ways. So definitely older.
What age group do you think is most effective?
Probably high school girls. Because I mean that's when they're looking to the media the most, looking for somebody to look up to, and that's when they see on the magazine ads and stuff like that.
Okay, well, thank you for your time.
All right, so as you can see in that video, we have both, men and women being interviewed and how media affects our images. Does anyone have firsthand experiences or see, like through male supplements or Victoria's Secret, how does it affect women more or men more?
I'll say men, because in high school, sports is really big in sports. Steroids is a big thing. Like, he went to Grand Bay, went to high school, and it was a really big football school. So a lot of the kids are doing steroids, stuff like that. So
I think it affects women more. They're the ones that end up with the eating disorders and all kinds of mental issues. I mean, that never happens with guys, really.
I think it affects both men and women fairly equally, but women are also more open about talking about the fact that it affects them. A lot of guys won't ever admit that they have an eating disorder, that it really affected them in high school to see those kind of advertisements, whereas women are very open almost about being self-conscious and saying like, oh, well, I don't look like that, I must be too fat, or oh gosh, my skin looks awful today, I don't look like her. I think they're just very open with that.
I think that both men and women are affected, but if you think over the last 100 years, women have the vote, they have birth control, they have education, they have all these things which should have freed us, but through the media and purchasing power, we're being controlled, thinking that if we can achieve the standard, that even if you can achieve it during a window, you can't over a lifetime, that you purchase your safety and your power.
Well, I think that media and all forms of media, whether that's photographs or television or radio or whatever, I feel like because we as a society, as a country, like just the U.S. in general, we're just surrounded and drowned in the media. And so I think that the media has a much stronger influence on us than we realize or are willing to admit. And I think that's why people in general are just so affected by body image, because the images thrown at us all day, every day.
I actually recently did research on this topic about how the media influences body image, and it's a global issue, so it's like all over. And some of the things I researched about were how like women are more susceptible to it, but men are still influenced. And also there's campaigns going on that are trying to help this, like the Dove campaign. The Dove campaign is making commercials that target what a real woman looks like. And they have some about men, but usually since women are more susceptible, they have more about women.
I'll do two more and then I'll move on.
I see what you're saying about the Dove campaigns, and at the same time, though, they're thoroughly flawed, because Dove is still a product. They're still trying to sell you something. And it's also, like, their most recent one that there was quite a bit of uproar, it was the one about the facial, the artist that was doing all the drawings of your self-perception versus what other people see. And I read this article on Tumblr, but I read this article where this person had looked at these images and they were still, there was lighter skin, the features were smaller, more petite, it was more slender than what the other women were thinking, and how that still kind of almost reinforces this idea of the perceived sense of perfect beauty as opposed to what is universally.
Yeah, and also in the video it touches on like, well, they said that media starts affecting in high school, but does anyone else have any opinions about that? Like when does it actually start seeing it as a child? Everyone doing something in the middle?
I think it goes all the way back to like before even middle school, because at that point you're old enough to recognize what you already like, but you have a hero or someone you look up to, and often that's maybe like for boys, for instance, a superhero. For girls, it's going to be an actress. If they don't reach that, they're going to feel disappointed.
I think that gender stereotyping starts when you are born. Because the first thing the doctor says is, it's a girl, it's a boy. You know what I mean? And then from there on, you know, girls get pink, boys get blue, boys get, you know, the G.I. Joes, girls get Barbies. I just feel like gender stereotyping starts, you know, right at birth, from birth, and it's pushed on us throughout our lives.
One more reference.
I was actually going to say the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I'm a music education major, and I have to go through these prerequisite credential classes. And one of the things we looked into was how not only from the moment you're born, it's also a matter of what the parents thought. Because the child, regardless of its, well, with its gender, knowing its gender, they're aware of their gender by the time they're like 1.5. But when they, let's say it's a boy, they observe their dad. He never cries. He never expresses himself. The boy thinks, okay, that's what I should do. But when babies are born, the boys are actually much more social. They're more facially active than female girls. So, but then somehow by the time they get to elementary school, they become reclusive because of how they looked up to your dads or other fatherly figures.
Exactly, and just like that, when you're born, you know, they actually wrap you with your girl in a pink blanket and a boy
Music
in a blue blanket. And as you
education.
can see, we're trying to break that stereotype with our shirts this evening. As for our next video, we are going to be dipping our toes into the topic of transgender. And we also want to note that the interviews that are in this video are publicly, or like, they're just opinion-based. They're not facts. They're not from any type of sources. They're just what are kind of like being, the information is kind of being twisted into like what their own opinions are, which, you know, it isn't always right. So with that, we'll have our next video.
That's because I knew him before.
Oh, so it was like a friend that you knew and then...
Neighbor.
Oh, wow. So it's nothing really changed after that?
I would have known it was him if I hadn't known that he had that.
Really? Mm-hmm. That's interesting. Now, do you know or have heard any stereotypes about gender? So, like, exactly what do you...
Well, it's very controversial. People have their beliefs on what they think is right and what's wrong.
So, now, how do you think media is portraying society?
I can't honestly say that I sat and listened to something on TV or the news regarding to that. My gut would tell me that they probably portray it in a positive note.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. And now do you think the media is trying to sweep under the rug and try to keep it hush-hush, or do you see them trying to accept it more?
I think that they're trying to get people to accept it more.
Have you ever met someone of the certain do you feel that these days society is more accepting of the third gender than what it was in the past?
Society is changing, that's not what I know, with like our conditions, like in our generations and more open about the gender is quite sure like that. Our generation is more open to
Thank you. Alright, so what do you know about the third gender?
Why do you not train the school or at that one? Because, well, I don't really just, check and say, hey, you got something else going down there? Or you don't just ask that question, say, hey, what are you, a boy or a girl? Or it's a hard question. Well, what's the problem with, just trying to find people? Or just, there's no problem. Yeah, just not into that kind of thing. So, having to guess, find out which gender they are, kind of like a couple questions. If you're ever meet one. Yeah, kind of. Oh, no, it depends.
My bad.
Media portraying about the third gender. I haven't seen any media at all about the third gender. I haven't seen any media, but I would say that, it's been known as to have a little more of a thing that's unreal. Now, how do you feel that these days of society are accepting transgender, or do you think they're kind of trying to still sweep it under the rug? Or I still think they're trying to get rid of it more ignore it, kind of a odd topic to talk about. Kind of very uncomfortable, like you said, taboo. Yeah. Just trying to keep it hush-hush. Hush-hush. All right, thanks so much. You're welcome.
So, do you know what the transgender is? Yeah, I know someone who has switched their sex, I guess from either male to female or female to male. Have you ever met someone? Yes, I actually have a professor at Chico State who is transgendered and told us all about his life story. What are some stereotypes you've heard about transgender? I've heard the term fudge or things that kind of classify if you're switching from a female to a male, you still have a feminine voice or certain characteristics of that gender. What message do you think the media sends to us about transgender? That's not normal, and that it's kind of more of a psychological, I don't want to say disorder, but it's a psychological problem rather than, I don't know, there are a lot of genetics behind it that play a part in it, and I don't think that society really hits on those points. Do you think that society these days is more accepting of transgender? I think we're getting there as gay rights are progressing. I think transgender is an issue that's going to be coming up a lot more, but I don't think we're fully accepting of them yet. Thank you.
So as you can see from our video today, as part of our forum, we wanted to bring up this topic of transgender, which for many of us in the audience may be a whole new topic, which is totally okay because lucky for us, we have an expert on this topic here today. So before I go ahead and introduce our guest speaker, I want to remind everyone to please go ahead and fill out those index cards that were given and write down any questions that you may have. Again, you'll be given a raffle ticket prize, but we're going to have a Q&A session, so write down any of those questions. But without further ado, let's give a round of applause for Ethan Kennedy.
Expert is really big shoes to fill. You see my eyes go up when you say that. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's such an honor and privilege. And I have to tell you that I do this work all the time. I'm a public speaker and I'm an educator, and I talk a lot about trans identities and gender and sexuality. And I have to tell you, I'm having an emotional response to some of the things that were said in the video, which is surprising to me because I don't live in a world that is absent of talking about gender and gender identities and sex and so forth. I think that for me, it's disheartening. First of all, to hear my life and experiences being referred to sort of an other, that's kind of difficult to hear. I surround myself with people who don't other me, so when I see it, it's kind of hard. So, I have 15 minutes, is that correct? Holy crap. Sorry. Okay. Typically I speak for an hour and a half, so we're gonna go through this real fast. Awesome, thank you for the extra 5 minutes. I'm 36, I'm a graduate student here at Chico State. I'll be graduating in a couple of weeks. I'm really excited about that. Over this school business. I was assigned female at birth, and I use the word assigned very specifically and for a very concrete reason, in the sense that we assign gender and sex. First we assign sex, and then we assign gender, and some of that has come up here today about how we gender people and the consequences of such assignments. I transitioned to male 5 years ago. In fact, I just passed my 5-year anniversary. And for me, that transition has included hormones and chest reconstruction surgery. So because I medically transitioned, technically the term for me would be transsexual. I'm not a huge fan of transsexual any more than I'm a fan of the term homosexual. It sort of puts this emphasis on one area of my life that for me is incredibly important, but it is one area of my life. So when I was asked to come speak here about the third gender, poor Nikki, I think I emailed her 14 times of like, wait, what am I talking about? So I'm sure you were a little alarmed, but I got it. There's a couple things that I want to clarify first of all. right? But most folks fall within this binary option or male or female, whether we're talking about sex or gender, right? And so, even though, like for me, I very much identify as male, that was part of my transition process. In forums like this, I very intentionally identify as a trans man. And that is an act of activism to push back up against the idea that there's only being male at 36 years old. I don't have the same experiences that another 36-year-old man who was assigned male at birth has. We have different pasts. We have different stories and we have different experiences. I was gender female for 30 years. It's very different than being gender male for 30 years, right? You all can think about your own gendered experiences if you have siblings or cousins or people really, really close to you. You can compare and contrast the things that were similar and the things that were very different. Most of those things are insidious and they undergird the very sort of sense of who we are and how we do our lives on a day-to-day basis. It's important to note also from that perspective is that when we talk about gender and we talk about gender performance, mostly what we are talking about is Caucasian gender and gender performance. Okay? We're not considering the cultural differences in which we all understand and perform our gender, whether we're talking about within the paradigm of a third gender or third sex. As a white man who grew up around a bunch of white people, my gender was scripted for me in that paradigm. And intersecting identities play a huge role in that. Unfortunately, some of the folks on that video really felt like us trans folk are portrayed relatively positively in the media. I would argue that that is grossly inaccurate. In fact, most trans folks are not portrayed very positively in the media, and when we are there, we are seen as deviant, we are seen as mentally ill, we are seen as unstable, and most often we are seen as deceptive. We are trying to fool somebody, and this shows up a ton in things like, is anyone in this room old enough to remember Jerry Springer? The trans person, not the positive memory that, you know, it's, because Jerry became very famous for a couple things, violence, first of all, but he became really famous because he had trans folk on his show a lot, and it was under the guise of deceiving their boyfriend or their girlfriend, which then subsequently led to them getting beat up, which was acceptable in the time, okay? That message still exists today. Every year, on November 20th, National Transgender Day of Remembrance is honored, and the point of that event is that it honors those who were murdered in the previous year.
Oh my gosh.
How many of you would say that, I'm going to throw out some random number. How many would you say would believe that last year in the United States alone, over 60 trans people were murdered? People were like, yeah, I can see that. Or people were like, wow, really? How many think that, like, yeah, I can see that, that's definitely possible?
I can't raise my hand.
Does anyone, when you think about that, because those folks were murdered purely based on gender performance, when you think about that, like, does that seem strange? To anybody imagine what it would be like to walk into a room and understand and think that the fact that you all potentially could be murdered simply because of how you're performing your gender or experiencing your gender? Yeah?
Wait, is that accurate? Over 60 were?
That's low. That's low.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for bringing that up.
Thank you.
So every year we put on an event. I put on events. I've done it for the last 5 years, the Transgender Day of Remembrance. Just since 1997, they have been tracking people worldwide who've been murdered for their gender identity and gender performance, and so trans folk. On a PowerPoint, there's 4 names per slide, and I have at this point, over 300 slides. And last year alone, I added over 260 names. Yeah.
Don't you think this could be just as high, though?
I'm sorry, say what?
Don't you think this those numbers could be just as high, if not even higher, before there was any true awareness of what it meant to be transgendered?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. The idea of transgender is a relatively new term. The idea of transsexual was only coined in 1941 by Dr. Harry Benjamin. So these are new concepts. People have been transcending gender forever and a day. The difference is that I think that the rigidity of our gender performance, the boxes, have increasingly gotten smaller and smaller, particularly for people assigned male at birth. I think that we are squeezing the life out of little boys, people who are assigned male, and we punish gender-varied children, gender-expansive children, particularly boys, in such severe manners. We shame them, we bully them. We call gender-expansive girls tomboys, and we call gender-expansive boys sissies or faggots or pussies, right? And those are very different messages, hugely different messages. And so we grow up with that. Intersecting identities, of those people, 260 people that I added to the list last year, all of them were trans women of color. All of them, right? So we're talking about an epidemic of institutionalized rigidity around gender performance and gender identity, and we're talking about racism. And overwhelmingly, the majority of those folks were also living and surviving in poverty. So we have classism in there as well. And so I think it's always important to consider that when we're talking about these things, that we have to remember that this is varied among cultures and varied among racial identities and ethnicities. Okay? Not everything is the same. We like to sort of filtrate things through white identity, but it's important to know that there are differences, really important differences. Yeah.
Is there a statistic of transgender people that commit suicide?
Yeah. Over 50% of transgender youth by the age of 20 have committed or have attempted suicide at least one time. Transgender people are 5 times to 6 times, depending upon the source, more likely to attempt suicide and 4 times more likely to be successful, if you will, at suicide. And so that's an alarming number, hugely alarming number.
You count those in your murder count?
I don't compile the list. The list is compiled through a large international organization, and so no, those people are not counted in that list. The people who have died at the hands of another person. And those murders are up close. They're not like I shoot you from here. Like I'm putting a gun to your eyeball and I'm shooting you, and you are dead, and then I'm stabbing you 50, 70 times, I'm decapitating you, and I'm burning your body. Like that's the kind of murder that we're talking about here. Okay. Not happy stuff, not exciting stuff. Let me see if I can move on to something a little more positive. Okay. So somebody just needs to tell me when I shut up. Okay. There's no, what's happening? 20 minutes? Crap that. Yeah. Okay. So transgender itself is an umbrella term, right? And it encompasses a variety of different things. Transgender people can experience genders in ways that are just slightly outside the binary, or they can experience the gender that is counter to whatever their assigned sex is. Umbrella term includes a lot of different things. Transsexual has a very concrete definition, and that is somebody who changes their sex through medical intervention. Okay? So it's important to note those are 2 different things. It's also really important to note that each person has a gender identity which is very different and separate from their sexuality. Gender identity, how do I feel about my body? How do I feel about the story that my body is presenting? When I walk in this room, my gender identity is male, and I would assume that all of you read me as male. Okay? If I were to walk in this room and be male and you all read me as female, that's problematic in my life. Okay? It's a real big problem in the sense of self-esteem and self-worth, and it makes going out into the world a little bit uncomfortable. Sex and sexuality is like, wow, who am I noticing? Who am I hoping to hook up with? Not necessarily who do I get to hook up with, right? 2 different things. So, that sexuality, we all have sexuality. Okay? They're 2 separate things, and they often get conflated to be the same thing. It can be a misnomer that people who are trans transition to have something about like having sex with men or having sex with women. How many of you have heard that before? Like, right? I mean, it's such an interesting sort of concept. I'm going to frame this for you. Thus far in my transition, I spent over $20,000 out of pocket. I could have a lot of sex with whoever I wanted to for 20 grand, right? I don't think it's reasonable to do that. Okay? And so typically what we talk about when we say that people transition as a way to have sex is that we're really looking at sexuality and not gender identity itself. So it's important to note those are 2 separate things. How many of you heard the word cisgender before? Okay, that's great. One of you who raised your hands, where have you heard the word cisgender before? Yeah.
I heard it from another friend of mine who was also transgender. Cisgender is basically, if I remember correctly, it is a person who is, in layman terms, straight.
Okay. So that's a good example of the conflation of sex and gender, which just happened there. So cisgender is somebody who is assigned female and identifies as female, or is assigned male and identifies as male. So it's somebody, cis means matching or same, and it's a term from chemistry. So it means someone who is not transgender or transsexual, essentially. And so the reason why that's an important word to note is that within our community, within the community of activism, we're moving away from the idea of biological male to biological female. How many in this room have had a chromosomal test? And if you have and you don't want to raise your hand, that's okay, because it's a private matter. I think most of you would not raise your hand, even if, right? Most of you have not had a chromosomal test and think to yourself, I have not had a chromosomal test. So I don't know, concretely, if I'm XXXY or some variation of. I would offer most of you, in fact, do not either. most of you have had your sex assigned to you based on a cluster of cells that represent either penis or vagina. Fair enough to say, right? So biology, I have no idea what your biology is. So for me to say you're biological female and you're biological male is awfully presumptuous on my part. It also puts a value that biologically male and biologically female have a hierarchical position compared to those of us who are trans and not biologically male or biologically female. Okay? So as a point of activism, we're moving away from the idea of biological. So we're going to use transgender, transsexual, and cisgender. Before biological female or biological male was real male and real female. I don't think I need to go into depth of explanation of why that is problematic. Right? Real. I mean, shit, there's a whole philosophy department about that. So, the idea of real. Okay, so cisgender and transgender or transsexual. Gender performance is largely compared to cisgender gender performance, right? And what has been normed around gender performance is just something that has been habituated over and over and over until it has become the norm. Okay? There is a president in, Roosevelt. There's a picture of President Roosevelt when he is a baby. And he is wearing a dress. Pink dress, at that. And the time in which that picture was taken, pink was seen as the strong, masculine, dominant color. So y'all would be super wrong here today. Okay? In your point, you would be great in the sense of like wearing pink. And so that was normed then. It was very, very typical, and at some point that started to change, and that became the habit, and that became the pattern, and now we live in a world, in fact, where we would shame parents for putting pink on a little boy. And so it's just an illustration of how we decide what is appropriate and inappropriate is just repetitive patterns, and that becomes the norm, and anyone outside of that becomes othered and becomes potentially punished and subsequently murdered. Questions as I look at my notes? Anybody? Okay. Am I like, are y'all following me? Y'all here with me?
I have a question.
Go for it.
Have you ever had, what is like the worst experience you've had where somebody has been very stubborn and said, no, you're a woman?
Very stubborn, is that what you said?
Yeah, stubborn, yeah.
I thankfully don't have a lot of those experiences. One of the times I was speaking, there was a gentleman in the class. There was a person who I assumed to be male in the class. And his body language was all about he was not on board with me at all. And I do a lot of speaking, so I read people, and it's all interpretation. Most of the time I feel like I'm pretty accurate. And finally, you know, in his act of bravery, like door handle sort of question or comment, as I was wrapping up the presentation, he raised his hand, and I was like, yes, score, I finally got him in. And he said, I don't know what his question was, and he continued to refer to me as she and a girl and female, and I was like, oh yeah, he, it's cool, no problem. Like, I tend to respond with humor. It disarms people a little bit. And he continued, and he continued, and what was interesting is that I didn't even have to say anything. The class started going at him.
Oh, yeah.
And making these really amazing counterpoints to it. And some of the counterpoints were like, oh, but I got you. Like, I think it's great that you're trying to do this. And so what happens is, in my experience, is that the people who were interviewed who said that they've never met somebody who was trans other than the person's neighbor, right? It's really easy for us to not see the humanity of people and very gendered experiences, right? And so, as I'm wrapping up the presentation in a class, and I've been standing for an hour and a half, sharing some of the most intimate details of my life and my experience as a trans person, and being trans and transitioning is not really a walk in the park. Certainly for most people, it has been more so for me. I had family support, I was able to transition, I now have white male privilege, I'm not faced with racism, there's a bunch of different things that allow me to have privilege within the trans community. So they started going at him, and he just couldn't move. He just could not negotiate his own sort of rigid notion of the binary. So that sort of at the face, and it was like, that's kind of like low fruit on the tree, my friend. Like, if all you got is to like female pronoun me, like, good luck with that. So early in my transition, that devastated me. Devastated me, because early on in transition for folks, we tend to be completely reliant on your experience of us, right? If I walked into a room early in my transition and 50% of you gendered me male and 50% of you gendered me female, that number is not good enough for me to feel comfortable or safe, because I needed you all to see me as I saw myself. there was some point during my transition in which I stopped needing it. And so by the time this young man decided that that was the best that he could do, it didn't impact me, it didn't affect me at all. On a more significant level, being a very out and visible trans man has not been without consequences. The most severe is death threats that I have received. And it's interesting that for me, I don't know, it just didn't impact me all that much, and I don't know if that was about coping or not. I got a lot of messages and people knew where I was going to be, and they talked about where I was going to be, and they talked about what they were going to do to me and where I lived, and they knew a lot about me, which is sort of the risk of standing in front of groups of people and telling people a lot about you. And so that was at the same time I did a cover story from the news review, and so I was, there was a lot out there. But for the most part, I do away. Okay.
What are your thoughts? I'll just pick the Catholic Church taking young individuals with a long history of that and desexualizing them, taking their hair, their clothing, taking their name away, both women being nuns and men being priests, and